Well, now this file has got to become 2 because I have to piece together these 2 videos because I accidentally shut my camera off when trying to pick it up from the fall. But once again, with going with John Cage episode, that this most unwanted event gives me confidence that it's fine, because that's kind of what John Cage decided was a good way of producing music, because he would throw the I Ching. Now the I Ching is it involves throwing like something like in the dice. You know, if you throw dice, meaning that there's more than one way it can land, and what the way that it lands indicates something to you. Now, but in the throwing of it, you always don't have the desired want an outcome, because I mean, you naturally do or don't, but this is to give up, because you are saying you obviously don't have the answer. So by throwing it up to chance and reading that, you're trusting in this idea that everything is not chaotic, that there is an order, to use that window of communication opening to tell you something. And a lot of people would call that total BS, but some people can use it as a practice. What's interesting, that music and art are kind of, in a way, they're kind of like, some people approach them as religions, and some people approach them as a science, and some people approach them as neither of those things, just as entertainment, and then some people approach it as a commodity. You know, use it as something, you know, they like to have something that can use, give them inspiration to fuel their work effort. And that's a purpose that I've found as a consumer to be valuable to me. But as a consumer, I'm interested in the thinking of the musicians, and John Cage's reasoning purpose that he found at one point for music was to create that silence in the mind, rather than create a melody in the mind that's going to be repeated. And so he influenced Woody Guthrie's statement at the time that a lot of people were criticizing John Cage. Woody Guthrie said, you know, when I was in Italy in World War II, and there was a period where I was experiencing some of the most beautiful things in the world I'd ever seen. But in that same instant, I was afraid of impending death. I was going to die. And he said the feeling of going through that, there is no modern music structure that can give a voice to it, and only something like what John Cage did could produce that. And because he found that, you know, in John Cage's recordings, that some feeling is communicated, or some feeling is felt that wouldn't have been felt in any other way of putting the music into existence. So what a lot of people feel as chaotic, sometimes the conflictory things that can be dissonance or chaos, or are kind of fitting for what a person can be experiencing. And that's what Woody Guthrie found in John Cage. And I found it really good coming from a guy who could have so easily disputed the validity of it not being music, because he was using a much older way of doing music. And I like that, because it's, you know, there can be competition amongst people in a given field, but there can also be competition amongst types of approaches to the field itself. And it's nice when I see the friendships there, because when you have someone who it's not their way of doing it, and they're not going to do it that way, acknowledge the other way of doing it and say, I can see the result as effective. And it's not going to change my way of doing it, but it does have a place in this world that we're in. And that's the way Woody Guthrie felt about it. So that's one person in the Beggar's Tomb that vouched for him. And another vouching for him that introduced me to me was a Grateful Dead Anthem to Beauty documentary. And they talk about the music at used in the Anthem of the Sun album. And they discuss Tom Constantin, a keyboardist from the Grateful Dead, he was very much studied avant-garde people and their output in arts, and he was very familiar with John Cage, and he said that it could be said they shamelessly stole or shamelessly imitated. I forget the word he used, but the shameless part I remember. John Cage. Now, mind you, that he can use shameless because he was part of the Grateful Dead, speaking of the Grateful Dead, and he just meant that, okay, what they had done was they used a contraption called prepared piano. Well, it's kind of John Cage's invention because he's the first one to do it, and he did it because he needed it to make less sound than it did at first. So he got into the workings of it and where the wires were, and found ways to muffle certain tones that were producing an undesired effect in their surroundings. Well, in that tinkering with the device itself, he got involved in all these experiments of what else you could do. And one of the things he found that produced a really interesting sound was to spin a top on top of one of the piano wires. And that is something that the Grateful Dead used in Anthem to Beauty, meaning that the sound is like they had a license to because nobody else had made that music. But the structure and the instrument and really very much similar to the sound they got from John Cage. Well, as far as contributing to John Cage, I mean, in a sense, they contributed him to me. So he benefited from that, if being in mind of a person and being having someone testify to the validity of your work at some point in time means anything, then it's fortunate that the Grateful Dead chose to imitate his, making that sound. And so, but then the greatest one, the most heartfelt, or the one who put the most thought into passing on John Cage's message to me, happened to be at the Further Festival. It was Mickey Hart's Mystery Box. But the song, well, like most of the songs that Mystery Box had done, Mystery Box was a new band. They got these female vocalists called the Mint Juleps, worked with Mickey Hart and his drumming crew of rhythm makers. Some of them had worked with him before, and a group called Planet Drum that won the first Grammy ever in world music. That's neither here nor there, but it's kind of interesting to note that these musicians in world drum came from around the world, and then teamed up with the Mint Juleps, who produced these nice, very nice vocals that were going on in pop music at the time, kind of reminiscent of Salt and Pepper or something like that. Very nice female vocalist of that sort of ethnic background and style of music and all that. So anyhow, the Mint Juleps are doing the vocals, and they got this great rhythm behind them. And then I'm hearing the song that turns out to be John Cage's Dead. Well, now, I didn't know what the lyrics were because I wasn't reading them, nor had I seen the track listing. Every song I was hearing was new because it was new to everybody on this Further tour, because it was the introduction of all these of a brand new band with a brand new bag of songs by Robert Hunter. So it was the keeping of some nice old stuff, meaning that we'd lost our Grateful Dead with Jerry doing it, but then in the Further Festival we had acquired all these new things born out of it, and found that these new things could be totally different in the sound. Like listening to Mickey Hart's Mystery Box compared to the Grateful Dead, you would never think that it was born from the same some of the same people, but the new people contributed a lot to it too. So the song is John Cage is Dead, but that's not what I'm hearing. And I got to say that what I'm hearing was based on my expectations or what answers I'm listening for. And what I heard and what I took to mind, what this from the sounds I was hearing was Junkie's dead, you know he's dead, and on and on and on. Now, the theme of the song was very much in testimony to the person that's in discussion. So I was thinking, this was the first Grateful Dead type thing I'd heard since Jerry passed, and even felt that there might not be another Grateful Dead type thing that really had power without Jerry, but it did have power for me. And not only that, but it was a testimony to the strength of the Grateful Dead. But anyhow, I knew that a lot of people, the mindset was that people that were critical of the Deadheads and the Grateful Dead were glad it was over. Honestly, because they were tired of hearing about it, because Deadheads can be very irritating if you don't want to hear it. And that's I can, as a person who's at 50 years old, believe me, I've been in the presence of something I didn't want to hear. And if you're in that presence and you can't escape from it, that's it can make you have negative feelings toward it. But that being said, as a Deadhead who still was clinging to it, and I knew some people didn't want to hear it, but sometimes I also knew that I had been the person who didn't want to hear it, and only because people, even I told them I didn't want to hear it, said, "I think you do," and ultimately, upon hearing it, I heard it, and I was glad I heard it. Well, anyhow, so I was dedicated to being a Deadhead, and am, but also am understanding of the people who don't want to hear it, and they've got to have a reason that they don't want to. I'm not downplaying the reason for not wanting to, and I'm not even saying it's the wrong thing for them to feel. If that's what they feel in their heart and that's what their mind is telling them, then by all means they shouldn't. And then they're making the right choice. And the Deadhead's going to keep probably being a Deadhead, and that person's probably going to continue to not be a Deadhead. But at some point, those paths can intersect. And anyhow, I'll tell you something else. A guy who I knew once told me, and this is why I say, if you're not connected to something and you don't feel you should, then it's good that you know what you want to do, because if you do become a part of something that you didn't want to get involved with, then you might ultimately come out of it as worse of a testimonial to it, and the thing would have been better off if you never got involved in it. I say that because a guy once told me about, I saw him when he first went on straight out of high school, and he was on tour with the Grateful Dead, and I saw that poor kid, and I remember thinking to myself, it's like some of these kids aren't even like ready for the least of adult experiences, and this is like, in a way, it's not like an adult experience, but it's with all the adult dangers and aspects to it. So it's not like going, thinking that these people that are doing it, meaning that you're driving out and free of, supervision, large distances, entering a parking lot scene of a strange city with, so many uncontrollable aspects and potential dangers. It can kind of understand how a parent who's wanting to cling to a child's development and well-being can be opposed to it, because there's a point where you just have to put if you believe in God, you got to trust in God at that point, because otherwise you've got nothing that can really give you trust. Well, by this point in my life, I had that trust in God, and I was like, boy, God's got his hands full with some of these kids, because they know nothing about how to survive. And just being as part of a group where a couple of different vehicles are involved and part of a caravan, you're trying to get from point A to point B, and trying to get people to get back into vehicles all at once so everybody can all go to the next place together without somebody getting stranded somewhere, was difficult to be part of. And at this point in my life, I'm in my mid-20s, and already, I kind of had these, believe it or not, and some people would very much dispute it, had a very adult sort of caregiving aspect to my friendship, meaning that if I considered you a friend, I cared about what happened to you, and I wanted that what happened to you to be good and beneficial, and at least of all, God dang safe, So just by naturally being in presence of somebody, I start, having these, concerns for their safety. Well, this was a kid whose safety I had concerns for, and then 10 years later, talking, seeing, lots of time had passed. Not see him for a while, then see him again, but see him have his ups and downs, have a lot of money and not a lot of money, and talk about things going on inside of his life and outside of his life. And a full 10 years later, I'm talking to the young man, and he's not as young as he used to be, nor was I. We both changed a lot and grown a lot, but I wasn't talking to a kid who couldn't take care of himself anymore. I was talking to a practical, well-spoken, not the snot-nosed kid you'd expect to see with his blanket at a gas station in the middle of the night looking lost and homeless. A guy who had his, vehicle sharp and clean, and showed himself to be a responsible person, and was still involved in the scene. He'd come into shows, but he said to me one time, about the legacy of Jerry Garcia. He said, that man ruined my life. And I'm like, what do you mean? And I thought he was kidding, and I thought he was like giving somebody else's opinion. And he's like, I'm serious. He's like, if I hadn't got involved in this way of life, then I would have got a college degree, and I would be doing something with my life now, and I'd be a success. And I'm stuck where I'm at now because I'm too old to be that. And I'm like, I found it so outlandish, But at the same time, he has a right to feel that, because if that's what he felt, a person's got a right to their feelings. But I said to him, I don't think you're seeing it from all perspectives. Because from my perspective, if it hadn't been for the Grateful Dead scene, you would be dead. And I feel that there's truth to that too. Because and who's right or wrong is more up to him than it is up to me, because he has ultimately power to determine whether or not his life has failed or not. So. But I was seeing his life as being a much greater success than what I'd seen earlier. So I'm hoping that he really, is able to see that aspect of it too, because maybe he's only been able to feel like a failure, and he's not seeing the fact that he isn't, well, at least he's responsible and an adult. So if nothing else, his life experiences have made him that. And if it didn't match his expectations of success, well, sometimes outcomes aren't something you can determine, and sometimes you just got to go with them. And that's back to John Cage, because that's what he did with music. He didn't try to control the outcome, as a composer typically does. A composer sets out to diligently mark everything, and it's kind of interesting language that you're using in music, because it's, even though it's not seen as a science, if you think about the language, it's an interdimensional language, meaning that the spoken language is marking a point in time that you have to dedicate another point in time to achieving a memory or a experience. And that experience can be somewhere in the future, a person can write about the future, or somewhere in the past. But the language itself is in a dimension that comes as very one-dimensional put on the page, but then it enters your mind and it can conjure up the whole vision, and so it can be made to be a multi-dimensional thing by the imagination, but in its outlay, it's the language it uses don't really give the power to do it in a scientific way. Music does, because it has a time signature. It tells you not only what sound should be produced, but also when in the field of time that sound should happen. Well, John Cage's introduced the chaos to that outcome, feeling that the feeling that would be produced would be the thing that needed to be felt, because he was leaving things open to the great voice of the creator, or whatever you want to call it, or call it nothing. You can say, Jerry Seinfeld, he did a show about nothing. But that show is about a lot of things. It's about what happens in the show. And it was brilliant, another, matter of a artist or a producer of content using what he has available to him. And sometimes you can find that in the nothingness, or in the absence of the commodity, you get the greatest outcome. To a man that was in the avant-garde, and Jerry Seinfeld, who's had maybe perhaps the best sitcom in comedic television history. That's an opinion, but it's one that I feel a lot of people would agree to, and that's fine if they don't too. But it's just also a testimony to how the nothing thing can be applied to reach that outcome. Okay, now what else do I have here about his life that should be mentioned? He used ESP. He studied telepathy in this same scientific approach. Once again, it's not clear if it's a science or not. It's a concept that it could be a science. Just like some people don't consider music as a science, because it doesn't have a clear, what would you call it, value. Its value is not inherited. Like in science, you're studying how energy can be produced and working towards something. Well, there's no saying that music works. So you can't really say, but some people have found it to work. You can say it, but some people can say it doesn't. And the reason they can say it doesn't is because it might work with spirit. Like, Mickey Hart's worked in trying to get the music put into the field of medical science, because he's come to believe that music can add to the health of a human being. Well, I can say that there's at least a testimony that dancing to music adds to the health of a human being. This is a great way to close this episode, because all these guys are popping into my mind, and that calls to mind James Brown. And I love when he says, get on the good foot, because first of all, I'm a guy that has a foot that's not as good as the other one. I don't want to say I have a bad foot. I like to say I got a good foot and a great foot, because I know, hey, as long as I can still stand on the one that hurts, I'm not going to call it bad, because it could be a lot worse. But he says get on the good foot, and I know that's coming, I know what it's like to have to get on the good foot when the other one's sore. And anyhow, I love that, because there's so much about James Brown's input into that music that I got to think of all those people that got up and danced to that music and got their heart rate up to a point that it improved the strength of their heart and helped them not only have what I call a spiritual contribution, meaning that I feel that experiences I've had with music renews you to get through the downtrodden points. So you can't say it gave you a nutrient, because it can't be. The FDA can't qualify it and say this is this letter symbol, that the elements. It doesn't have descriptive elements that can fully be defined. It's only defined within the construct that it is music, and as we've stated, it's not even agreed upon as to what that is, because John Cage believes that total chaos of sound is music, because it's God making the music, and it's everybody making the music. And so the two people can work to the same means and have the same benefits, because we're all joined in the same conversation when we're all talking about music together. And so therefore you get the song, you get the great production, but you can't negate the people that put the order and validity into it either. So it's good that music's questioned as to whether or not it's a medical field, probably, because it could give all kinds of people with a drum license to have it licensed as a tax deductible. I don't know. I'm not saying a person should have to have a permit to have a drum either, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I want you to cure my cut in a time of bleeding. So It's good that we got, but at a time where I'm just feeling downtrodden and want a little pick me up, well, then a drum might be better than a medicine that could become addictive or who knows what. So, hey, so there's good. That's when we get back to Einstein's theory of relativity. And it's so good that we're including this on a season episode because we're bringing back all these great things into mind. I got Bob Marley popped into my mind too because it's been, I mentioned him in a song recently, and I'm thinking, first important person knows I'm a fan of Bob Marley, but not necessarily at the time. They don't have to know that. It's okay if they think I don't know what I'm talking about too. I got Bob Marley's axe. What the heck does that possibly mean? Well, I'll tell you something, one of these great coincidences that made me feel a binding to a person. When I got to a street, I'd been given directions to Hollywood from Venice Beach. I'd spent some time on Venice Beach, asked them, if you could sell my artwork there somewhat, but it's mainly a tourist crowd to come into the beach, and not more this group than that group, just a broad section of a lot of different people, and trying to have the pictures to appeal to them to where they want to buy something, when what they're really just wanting to do for the main part is enjoy the experience of seeing things. They're not really it's not a lot of your rich people that come to Venice Beach and stuff, but anyhow, I wanted to go over and check out Hollywood to see what was going on there. I've always heard of it. So I went to Hollywood Boulevard and I was given directions on it. And when I first got to the point of realizing I was on the Hollywood Walk of Stars, when I see the stars up ahead, this is I'm there. This is the Hollywood Walk of Stars. And I looked down. Well, whose star was I standing on but Bob Marley's? And I said, okay. And then come to find out from, walking the streets for the next week and looking at all those stars, how few of the names are people that I have any knowledge of ever existing. And it kind of gives you that grand scope of people that were celebrated and considered important by a group of people. Well, nobody really can necessarily determine that person's lasting fame, but people can try, and these people, the Hollywood stars, have been set out, and the only one of them, I believe, that is somebody from the Beggar's Tomb was the one I happened to be standing on at the point I was there. So, verification for me in the communication speaking that John Cage felt music could cause the communication. So that's a case of music history, being Bob Marley's music history, coming into the present, time transporting his legacy into to the pseudoscience of trusting in chaos in the current field of the I Ching. And here we are back at the Beggar's Tomb, and it's 2023, and we're here at the closing of this episode. And so what I want to bring us to an end with is getting back to that conversation from that Further Festival back in 1998, where I heard one thing, but another had been in the words I would find out of that song. It wasn't saying Junkie's dead, it was saying John Cage is dead. So I got the album when it came out. I bought it and loved it, and the recordings were great too. The studio recordings were great, just like the live ones have been, and the lyrics were printed nice in there. And so I was able to sit down and study the lyrics and listen to the music and learn the songs that Robert Hunter intended, and find out they had a benefit in the mishearing, but they also had the benefit in hearing correctly. Because I found out, he's talking about John Cage, and this John Cage that he was talking about, who he was talking about with such reverence towards him, that I thought he was talking about Jerry, because who else would he be talking about with that much reverence as someone who'd recently passed? And it just happened that he wasn't, but yet it did give me that idea of that mindset. Well, let me go with these words. And in going with these words, I'm going from my memory to a point. I've refreshed my memory with this psalm over time, but to a point I haven't refreshed it to the point where I satisfactorily say that I couldn't get a word wrong. But that being said, how you can trust in this Beggar's Tomb to be the truth of what it's saying it is, and an accurate representation is in the research, once again, because although I'm trusting in the fact that if I get a word wrong, I'm not going to damage it to the fact that we, as within this beggar's tomb, have that trust in a mistake. If it's you can only take my word for it. I'm never going to maliciously do anything to make it deceptive, to damage you. But I've got evidence, and I'm saying that I'm giving validity to the fact that I trust that great things can come even through the mistakes. Because if you know it's a mistake and you search out the error that I made, then it caused you to find the truth, and it can ultimately represent the truth to me as well, if I am mistaken. But once again, getting to my right to have the mistake already being testified, because I'm going to be quoting Robert Hunter. I'm also quoting Robert Hunter when I say this: I hope you get pleasure out of it in its transitory state, realizing what conditions must come to pass before it is truly completed. Meanwhile, look at it. The finished tune, as performed and finally recorded, is only one extreme of the songwriting phase. The song and the act of being formed and fitted is also part of the real song. My versions of these songs are no more the real ones than those that may have spoken to you from a garbled tape recorded 20 years ago. I hope that seeing the intended words will provide you with an interesting, if not always convincing, variant on the words some of you actually heard. And he puts it in those writings to be like, to give testimony to what you thought, to the memory. It doesn't make it any less real if you believed it and you felt it. And you can move on from it with the step that allows you to do that, but that you don't have to negate the fact that you weren't where you were supposed to be at the time you felt you were supposed to be there, because that was the point in time that you were there. Okay? So we've got this testimony that this is going to be all right to do this when I quote these words that Robert Hunter wrote about John Cage. I've been sitting here cooling my thighs, watching these dead dog days roll by. Shoes in the buttermilk, wolves in the bread. I just heard John Cage is dead. I hear foghorns in the breeze come alive with symphonies. I built myself a hurricane fence because I don't believe in accidents. I wonder where that fellow went. The one who wrote the book of love with stick and wet cement. He looked like Jimi Hendrix and he shook like Santa Claus. He didn't mind your justice, but he could not take your laws. John Cage, he's dead. John Cage, you know he's dead. He's dead, he's dead, you know he's dead. He's dead, you know he's dead. I've been sitting here dripping with frost. I could be found or I could be lost. You got dreams and so do I. Yours won't live and mine won't die. Shut my mouth, clench my fist, tape an alarm clock to my wrist. Stop the music, let me hear you breathe. Don't want to hear your story, I just want to read. Don't take me to paradise so fast I get the bends, but you don't have to shut the book until the story ends. It's a technical ploy on a vertical night by a slack-jawed monkey with an appetite. The digital carried the sound so well that you could smell the whiskey on the dogs from hell. Picture me down on the farm with a crotch-whip bull upon my arm, crack the whip, and the jingle bell rings. Kettle drums roar, and the fat man sings. John Cage, he's dead. John Cage, you know he's dead. He's dead, he's dead, you know he's dead. He's dead, you know he's dead. Look at all those wide-eyed people staring at the sky. I don't know what they're waiting for, or waits the time to try, or fail to say what could be said by the heart's unstifled cry. I don't believe John Cage is dead. He's not the type to die. And that was a powerful enough testimony to vouch for, to begin my research into John Cage. And that's how he got here, through the vouching, and he remains here in ranking on account of his own substance that I found in in looking at things. Because I love this aspect of viewing both extremes. I believe that you can have both extremes, and it's good if we can't, then we can't have peace, because we have function as a society lots of times on a this or that side choosing of things. Well, that's great to feel that you're where you're supposed to be and that you believe that you're on the right side, but it's also conductive to other people's existence if you can be on that side without the idea that the other side can't exist. And within this testimony on the Beggar's Tomb, we have that example with Woody Guthrie and John Cage. They share the aspect they're both born in 1912, and they share being in the Beggar's Tomb. But as far as musical, if you find it in other musical categorical grouping, you won't find them there together. Unless there's one that's just based purely on time period, they might be. But if it's based on style of music, which most are, even once breaking down a time period, they're going to break it down in these sections of, because a person who was into this experimental music probably won't like traditional folk. But if you know the story of the Beggar's Tomb that unites these things, then you can see why they both need to be there. And that gives validity to the reasoning for the Beggar's Tomb, because it creates a grouping of things that have this bond, and having a place for the statement for it won't be found somewhere else. I get that also from a line of I felt meaning to of a Robert Hunter song. Said, I thought I heard a jug band play. If you don't, who else will? Over on the far side of the hill. Well, so many times I'd be looking out of a farmhouse I lived in one time, and across the road there was a hill, and it had a far side like most hills do. And those words, I could see it with my eyes and feel it with my heart and the whole 9 yards. And that's what you call the spirit. Some people say it doesn't exist, but when you feel it and then you make statements about it, even though they might sound mad, but at the time it's what I'd feel. And so I thought I heard a jug band play. Grateful Dead started off as a jug band. They called themselves Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions, and so that's what they started off as. But they developed into the rock and roll experimental vehicle known as the Grateful Dead, and radically were groundbreaking. Take my word for it. I heard them live, my own ears, and I can say that. But yet they still remain those jug champions, started from those most humble beginnings. Well, Robert Hunter had also read saying that sometimes, something speaks to you, and that meaning, even if you're mishearing the words, that was what the voice was doing, because we've got that trust within this thing that it can speak through that. So Robert Hunter had that trust with the Grateful Dead's music, and John Cage had the trust with, he stationed the whole basis of the structure of the music to give the voice to that. So it's like the beatbox of God, the giving the voice that really wants to speak the power to truly speak. You leave the holes in, because those holes are that voice. Now the Grateful Dead based their concerts to have that within some songs, but also to have its own designated point for the concert experience itself, where it was predetermined that it was going to be that. But it's hard to make something truly be predetermined, especially when you're kind of saying, okay, we're going to do something totally new and fresh without knowing what we're going to do until that point comes, when you can't, once you've established that that's going to happen, your mind already begins to dilute the validity of the spontaneity by having the precept that spontaneity is going to occur at a certain point. Nonetheless, they gave it more, they made an effort to give pure chance and an opportunity to make its point stated also by producing the music that they're not reading with their eyes. And it's clear lots of times they also got something very different going on in their brains that a lot of people wouldn't call guys doing it together at the same time music. They would call it practice or noodling or arguing or anything other than music. But I love that part of it, the show, because that was one part that I knew I wasn't going to have heard before. And I knew that also, if there's validity to the idea, the concept that's been stated within the Grateful Dead, that the Deadheads are part of the band because the band members themselves said that when the voice of the people that they're there with, and people dancing, and just the whole atmosphere of the crowd itself, it very much influences the music that comes out. Well, that's a great, wonderful thing, because it gives you, I know that the band feels that way, because it gives you a belief in your own power to to help things, be of benefit, not just to study a benefit. Be like, this is very beneficial. Study it, look at it, and be like, if something's beneficial, then I want to be a part of it, and I want to help it be benefiting. And that's something that Grateful Dead said you can do that. Well, that's what I've done. And it's about Bill Monroe, because I didn't get into why I brought him up earlier, other than state he seems also traditional, but he also, music history speaking, to Europeans, he was an inventor because he came up with the bluegrass sound. Well, I think in bluegrass sound, even though it brought in traditional Irish and Scottish folk music aspects and instruments and stuff like that, and Italian, all the immigrants came here together, but there are other contributions too, and I feel you can very much hear the Native American voice in the music too, especially since sometimes it's included in the lyrics also. That helps, but I feel that bluegrass is very American music. So he's also, in one way he's very traditional, in another way he's very innovative. But the important thing is he was a great musician and a great contributor of good music that has what I feel is a benefit. But more than that, something that you wouldn't think the Grateful Dead had structured themselves after, one of the things that seems the most radically different than other bands, they actually got from what Bill Monroe was allowing. He wasn't saying do it or don't do it, but he didn't stop them from doing it. And that was Jerry Garcia and David Grisman going to hear Bill Monroe playing and recording openly, not having to hide the recording apparatus where it's going to damage the quality of sound you're able to get, but allowing them to record that music so they could have it, because they valued it as a commodity. Jerry, if you don't know, started off as a banjo player. He grew up watching the Grand Ole Opry. He's very much an authentic country western producer of music, as well as also a very experimental musician. There's no posing in any of the music that he showed his great skill with, but his roots were in Bill Monroe. So not only in the music that he heard, but he liked that they were able to do that. They didn't get stopped from doing it. And because he didn't get stopped from doing it, and he felt justified for why he was doing it, and he was justified for doing it, but then he also couldn't shut that door behind him for what he was doing. So he left the door open for Deadheads to come in with tape recorders and have that music and have it in their possession, and that garbled up tape, and it sounds like one of a kind because it comes through the old analog systems of production where it's done one at a time, and they can't be exactly the same ever because of difficulties. But as we're stated, it's not being the same ever that also gives the opening to things. And it can be said, if it has to be said, if a person's own livelihood comes down to it being said, that even if it has to come down to somebody trying to create a copyright thing on you. Now, that being said, I feel that contradiction with any of these people here, but a lot of them, since they are dead, the concerns come up because in some cases I don't know who they belong to now, because lots of times when copyrights expire on a licensing of the copyright expires because a certain period of time goes and the artist is dead, well, that can fall into somebody else's hands, and suddenly somebody who say dislikes somebody and says, hey, this guy's he's stealing your music and you should shut him down. And so therefore that can be done that way. Well, with the Grateful Dead, it shouldn't. Really shouldn't. If you really believe in the Grateful Dead's music, and even no matter how much you feel a part of it, you shouldn't feel that you're so much of a part of it that you can shut the door off to other people's forced state. Now, that being said, that's not to say I should be allowed to go out and say, I am the Grateful Dead, build myself as the Grateful Dead, and people show up and it's just me there. Even the Grateful Dead themselves only billed themselves as the Grateful Dead a few times after Jerry passed away. They usually used another name in case, from what I understand, they voted on it as a band, and they had one vote nay, and that was Bill Kreutzmann, went against it. So they didn't do it, but yet it remained in the books in another way because it was called Further Festival, given recollection back to the bus that Ken Kesey drove when the Merry Pranksters were doing acid test, and Neil Cassidy was there dancing at the acid test. So back to the roots of the roots with the band they went. So they kept the name. They get rid of one name, but we're calling an older name. All the names, you don't wash names away. We all know this point. No matter how much you desire to have a name at any given day, you will have that name that you're given on that day. That's one thing that the world reserves the right to have, as long as we believe sticks and stones may break my bones, names will never hurt me. But if we don't believe in that, if we believe in getting called a name, it can hurt you so bad, then we may have to lose all sensibility and cave to having people persecuted for calling somebody a name or this and that. It just gets outrageous. So I go back to the old sticks and stones. That being said, it's not nice. It can be darn sure not nice to call somebody a name. It can also be funny to call somebody a name if that was the intended meaning. So many people got names that were meant to be making fun of them at the time they were given. That's how I got the name Pork Chop. Nobody would ever call me Pork Chop if they knew I was going to love it. Only when they found out I loved it did they take it away. Well, we didn't mean that to compliment you. Darn it. But it's like, well, I took it the way I did. So they can't fully take it away. They can stop using it, but they know they used it, and they can't take away the fact they did use it. And they also can't take away the fact that they meant to mean when they used it. But they can't take away the feeling I have about having it. And I still have it. You can't take it away. That's the way names work. And with that name, we get to the day of the name of Beggar's Tomb. And here we are, episode 10. I hope you enjoyed the season. I hope there's many more. I got a lot more to talk to. And it only gets more involved and more connected. Things start making more and more sense. Popping and firing like the synapses of a well-tuned mind. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm out.